I'm sure if you read the title, you're already skeptical, but hear me out. I have reasons for thinking this about Marvelous USA and the XSEED brand, and I do not take this lightly. All I ask is that you hear me out. It has come to everyone's attention that XSEED hasn't been crediting those that worked on their localization projects. This comes from Brittany Avery, who left the Western arm of Marvelous late in 2018. Avery was surprised not to see her name in the credits of the PS4 release of Trails of Cold Steel. From her Twitter feed, quote, "Oh lol, the PS4 ending credits for Cold Steel 1 were updated so my name isn't in them. So I'm guessing it's the same for Cold Steel 2 as well. I'll be really bummed if the same thing happens with Mysteria's physical release just because it launched after I left. Between this and the new title announced today, I feel like the world is content to keep playing terrible jokes on me. I'm so tired." XSEED, for their part, responded to the issue with this tweet, quote, "We appreciate the hard work of everyone who contributes to our releases, but it is and always has been company policy that only current members of our staff are credited. We have never credited staff for their individual roles or if they have left the company." End quote. This is an unethical policy that needs to be fixed. From what we've heard, Avery was a key member of the localization of several games, especially with regard to the work on Neon Falcom games, including the East series, the Trails in the Sky trilogy, and the first 3 Trails of Cold Steel games. And doing this is not just scummy, as Jim Sterling put it. I contend that this is plagiarism. I do not make this accusation lightly. Plagiarism is a serious offense that is damaging to one's reputation and is tough to overcome. However, I have reasons to believe this. From the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there are 4 definitions of plagiarism: to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another's as one's own, to use another's production without crediting the source, to commit literary theft, and to present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. From this, I contend that XSEED is guilty of definition number 2. For Cold Steel 1, Avery was a project coordinator and voiceover director among other responsibilities, and for Cold Steel 2, she reprised her role of voiceover director and added project manager and lead editor. Given how massive an undertaking localization of Neon Falcom game is, it would make sense that they would use the same audio and text assets from the PS3 to the PS4. That would mean that her work would be going uncredited in the PS4 version of the game. You might contend that this issue doesn't matter since it's ultimately a project by XSEED. And legally speaking, you'd be right. Avery would have no standing in a court of law over this issue since the matter must deal with a copyright, which Avery would not have. However, I'm not contending plagiarism as a matter of legal issue. My issue is more on the basis of morality, but I also contend that if XSEED were a person in school, they would fail due to not crediting a source. In this case, Brittany Avery. Now you may be asking, isn't this Neon Falcom's game? Why would you contend that XSEED is plagiarizing a translator? Fair enough, it is Falcom's game, but bringing over a game is more complex than plugging in the right words. Localization is just as much an art as it is a science. Remember Resident Evil? Remember the lockpick scene? In the original, Barry handed Jill a lockpick and said,
"Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you."
In the remake, the localization was redone to make the translation sound more normal to a native speaker. In the end, the master of unlocking became this.
"It's a lockpick. You'd make better use of it."
That little difference changed the game from having a literal translation to one that makes sense to a Western audience. I'm not saying that Avery prevented a master of unlocking situation, but what I am saying is that localization allows for artistic license in order to get across the ideas from the original language. And because XSEED is using her work without crediting her, I contend that they have plagiarized. Going back to the school analogy, if you worked on a group project in school, you would expect to have credit when the time came to turn it in. But let's say that after working on the project, someone actively removed your name from the assignment. Now, someone has taken credit for your work, and you are left holding the bag with nothing to show for it. That would be plagiarism, and the person at fault would be punished, and depending on the code of conduct and school policy, they could be expelled. Unfortunately, this happens in the industry more than we would want to happen. XSEED just so happens to be the scapegoat of the week because they were the only one to actively admit to it. Remember the PSP port of Final Fantasy? In case you don't, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the man behind both the original game and the franchise as a whole until he left Square Enix, was left off the credits of the PSP port for the first Final Fantasy game. Square Enix literally took his work and passed it off as the work of others. This is essentially what XSEED has done to Avery. Now, I loved XSEED. Well, actually, I loved pre-Marvelous XSEED. I loved that they would take chances on games that no one would have, like Retro Game Challenge, Little King's Story, Half Minute Hero, The Skycrawler's Innocent Aces, Fragile Dreams, Ivy the Kiwi, Solatorobo Red the Hunter, and East 7. They were literally one of the key players in keeping JRPGs relevant in the West. Marvelous USA XSEED has been a little harder to love. Sure, they were able to localize the last story in Pandora's Tower, Bullseye reference, as well as the wonderful Legend of Heroes games, but the focus has been more on Marvelous as their Western arm. And while that does include the Story of Seasons franchise, formerly known as Harvest Moon, and Fate Extella, that also includes a hell of a lot of Senran Kagura games, which I know it has fans, but wasn't exactly why I bought into XSEED years ago. But now, here we are. Rune Factory is making its Switch debut later this year with a 5th entry coming later, and I am in a position where I have to skip both. I love Rune Factory 4, but I can't give money to XSEED. Hell, I'm now planning on skipping Demon X Machina in September, and no more Heroes after that, and they have nothing to do with XSEED. Demon X Machina is a Nintendo localized game, and No More Heroes is done by Suda51. But Marvelous has a hand in both of them, which means they now get punished by association. However, I do want to make this point perfectly clear. I am not burning this bridge between us. I will not buy your games because of your policy for crediting workers. But if you were to change it, if you were to start crediting everyone that had a hand in the game, regardless of their current employment status at your company, I will gladly return. All of us, well, I can't speak for all of us, but I feel like most, if not all of us, that have called you out would return. And perhaps after hearing of this change, you could even get new customers, those who are looking to support companies with sound corporate ethics. After all, it would be your policy.